Good afternoon, everybody. This is such a nice crowd. Welcome to the West Tisbury Library, and thank you all so much for joining us today for our talk, What Do the Ancestors Want From Us?, with Dr. Stephanie Stevens and Constance Mesmer. Stephanie holds a PhD from the University of Kent, Canterbury, UK, in Jungian psychology. That's a hard one for me. Between 2004 and 2013, she served on the executive committee of the International Association of Jungian Studies. She teaches psychology in the International Baccalaureate program, is a practicing counselor, and will be joining the faculty in the Department of Counseling at the University of Canberra in Australia. And I also want to mention that she traveled all the way from Australia to be here today, which is amazing. Constance is a professional psychic, medium, and channel who offers private and group sessions and teachings. She is a member of the Parapsychological Association and conducts ongoing research, writings, and contributions in the field of psychic development and parapsychology. I'd also like to mention that we have MVTV filming today. And if you have any friends who couldn't make it today, let them know that it'll be available online and on the TV station pretty soon. Usually takes about a week. Thank you all so very much for coming, and please join me in welcoming Stephanie and Constance.
So exciting for me, and this is such a beautiful group and such a beautiful setting as the library. This room is so beautiful, so we have a good setting to start our work for today. So what I'd like to do to start off is I'm going to take a leaf out of a handbook from my adopted country, Australia. And whenever people gather in Australia for any kind of public function, they always acknowledge the original landholders. So what I'd like to do today is acknowledge the original landowners of this property, which is the Native American Wampanoags. And I'd also like each of you to kind of think of someone who's in spirit or someone you know that maybe nudged you to come here today. And so I'd like to invite them into the session and into the room. And just let's take a moment to do that. And a couple of breaths to bring them in. And I'll have to tell you a funny story. When a couple of years ago I was in Cape Town giving a paper, and I invited ancestors and I thanked them for the invitation to speak in South Africa. And the conference was 3 days long. This was on the second day, and I said this, and all the electricity in the building went out. Oh my God! We were sitting in darkness, and I said I should have thanked them way earlier. And then just about a minute later, it all kicked in again. So that is kind of what we're doing here today, is acknowledging and focusing on how the ancestors influence our lives. Okay. So I was going to tell you a little bit about how I kind of got into Jungian studies and why Jung's really influenced me. I was a Latin teacher for many, many years, and I taught Virgil's Aeneid. How many of you have read the Aeneid? Okay, it's a book you might read in high school, maybe with the Odyssey. Okay, it's a typical hero's journey.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't recognize what you were saying.
Right, the Aeneid. It's a typical hero's journey. We have a hero who is fated and destined to found a new land. We know that new land is Rome in Italy, but he is fleeing the burning Troy. He takes his father and his son with him and the household gods with him, and he runs out of the city, and he turns around and his wife has died and appears in a ghostly form and says, "You must leave. You cannot wait for anyone else. You have to keep going." So he gets in his boats with the remaining survivors and he sets on this journey. Now, halfway through this journey, he meets a woman called Dido. He falls in love, and that's a disaster of a relationship, so that falls apart. Dido commits suicide, and again, he has to leave Carthage to found this new land. At some point, his father dies, who had accompanied him, and his father, Anchises, appears to him in Book 5 of the Aeneid. It's 12 books, and Book 5 and 6 are watershed books. And in book 5, he said he appears to him in ghostly form and says, I want to talk to you. I want you to come to the underworld because I want to talk to you. Now this scene stayed with me for many, many years because my question was, well, if you had already got his attention in ghostly form, why didn't you just tell him what you wanted to tell him? But the message was, you have to come to the underworld. And that sat with me because I thought, well, where's that? And how is he going to get there? And what does that mean to an ancient reader? What does that mean for a modern reader to go to the underworld? So I thought about this for a long time, and I found a supervisor, and I said to him, I really think I'd like to do more exploration of this. And my husband too. He said, you've been looking at this for a long time. I think you need to study this more. So my supervisor said, I think you need to read Jung and see what he says about the underworld and the unconscious. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. So I got a copy of his autobiographical memoir called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Has anyone read that? Yes, okay. Now, I read this book on an airplane, and I could not believe how many encounters with the dead Jung had. And really intimate encounters with the dead, and grappling with an understanding of why the dead appear to us. Here was someone who was struggling very hard to understand his own material, and it appeared in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So at the time, I was really thinking of doing a Jungian treatment of the Aeneid, kind of having a look at what Aeneas is really doing with the underworld and the unconscious. In 1895, Jung's father died. And 6 weeks later, he had 2 dreams of him. And the dreams were very, very moving for him. And the way he talks about it in Memories, Dreams, Reflections really clued me into how he was struggling with this. And he didn't say, I had a dream about my father. He said, I wonder why my father returned and was talking to me. And so the way he was talking about this experience of this bereavement of the deceased father returning cued me into he was experiencing his father in a very different way than he would experience dream material, okay? So about this time, too, he was befriending, not that time, 1906, he met Freud. And he and Freud, starting in 1906 and 1907, a very, very long, in-depth, professional and personal relationship. They were each kind of head of their individual psychological circles, Freud in Vienna and Jung in Zurich. They had gathered quite a few members to them, and they were really influencing the thinking of the time about the unconscious. They were talking a lot in these psychological circles about the unconscious. At the same time, William James in Boston, down the street, and a French psychiatrist, all were studying mediums. They were all studying mediums, and they were very, very interested in what happens when women do that. When they start talking, and they're saying they're talking to the dead, what is really happening in this dynamic? So Freud and Jung wrote and talked about this a lot. They were writing back and forth to each other. In 1907, Emma Jung, Jung's wife, and he decided to go and meet Freud and his wife. They arrived in Vienna, and they sat down to talk, and they talked for 13 hours straight. 13 hours nonstop. And part of this pull was this fascination with what was going on in the unconscious and the timeliness of it. What was it saying to them at the time? Now, their professional relationship would end up having quite a strain. And the strain was really about this issue of how the unconscious and the conscious interact together, okay? And Freud kept saying, well, libido is all about repressed sexuality. It's repressed sexual energy. And Jung said, no, it's got to be more than that. Psychic energy has to be about the self, about moving people into a space of more knowledge about themselves. It's not just about repression and suppression. And so they argued about this quite a bit, back and forth. Now, about this time, too, we're going to watershed, stand over here and do a sidebar. About this time, too, there was a woman named Sabine Spielrein, who was a patient of Jung's in the Burgolsee, in the psychiatric hospital in Zurich. And Freud had sent this woman to Jung to be analyzed and to see if he might be able to help her. She was quite young at the time. She was then about 17. And maybe some of you know this story through the film The Most Dangerous Method with Ralph Fiennes, maybe. But what happened, she was a very, very intelligent young girl, and Jung would take her with him on rounds in the hospital. Okay, she was very bright. And after about 6 months, he got her to the point where he started recommending that she go to medical school too, and that she become an analyst herself. And so this relationship was kind of on and off, and she fell in love with him, basically. Okay? She went off to search, she did become a doctor, and she did become an analyst. And throughout their friendship, her feelings for him became quite deep. And it got to be a little embarrassing, because at one point, several years, we're saying 5 years later, after they first met, she started saying, I want to have his baby. Now, he already had children with Emma Jung, okay? So this was becoming very embarrassing. And to the point where Emma stepped in and said to Freud, started writing to Freud, saying, you have to do something about this, because you sent this girl to him, and there's some real issues about what's going on, and it's becoming embarrassing. So at this time, we're about 1911, 1912, the pressure that Jung was feeling professionally, emotionally, and even spiritually was starting to weigh on him, and he was starting to have some emotional responses. And so at one point, he, in September of 1913, about this time, he started having dreams, some very intense dreams, and the dead kept appearing to him at this time. The dead were quite alive. They were sending messages. He would be walking in a cemetery, and he would see a stone effigy, and it would start to move and start to speak to him. So he was really becoming quite haunted with this material of the dead coming back. And in September of 1913, finally, he had written basically a treatise, a part of a book that said, I don't agree with Freud. That the symbolism that comes from the unconscious can be associated with all kinds of things, not just repressed sexuality. And so they had an official break. And it was incredibly painful for Jung, because Freud was a father figure to him and had helped him a great deal enter in psychological circles at the time. So, compounded with this love affair gone crazy and gossip that was going around in the various circles, this was a very, very difficult time for Jung. And he quit everything. He moved out of the Bergolzi, he quit his job as a psychiatrist, he quit his editorship of his journal he was writing, he was editing, and he stepped away from public life. And he began having visions. And the visions started in September, October of 1913, and lasted every single day until April, May 1914. And every single day he wrote down exactly what happened in his visions. And this was compiled into the Red Book. Now, has anyone seen the Red Book? Anyone here seen the Red Book? Okay. So the Red Book is a complicated text. It's a complicated narrative. And one of the visions he had in October of 1913 was Europe frozen and the sea was full of blood. And he was really disturbed by some of these images because he could not figure out the significance or the meaning. He was well practiced in understanding and talking about symbolism in other people's dreams, but he couldn't seem to apply it to himself. And so he grappled with it. And again, he wrote everything down, he painted. One of the most beautiful things about the Red Book is, in fact, the paintings he's done. People didn't realize that he was really a very accomplished artist and really had an eye for color. So it was then that he also introduced mandalas. And he started painting mandalas quite a bit every day. Some of the encounters he had during these everyday sessions were about just talking to characters. Characters would come, and girls, boys, people in uniform, and he would have conversations. And what he realized was that this was actually a process, and he called it active imagination. Okay? And active imagination was one way of getting unconscious material to consciousness. One way we have it is through dreams. The unconscious speaks to us in dreams. What's great about dreams is our ego is not activated during sleep, and so it comes to us unbridled, okay? It's raw material. The other way it comes to us is through fantasy thinking, when our mind wanders, okay? This process of active imagination mined all of this pressure and all this angst he had been feeling into symbolism and into a visual form. And so I was kind of trying to think of a way of how we could maybe have an experience of active imagination. So I think I'm going to try something, and let's see how close we can get to it. So while I'm talking and you're looking at Constance and you're looking at me, I want you in your mind's eye to see a lemon. Okay? So you're still looking at me, everyone has their eyes open, and you see a lemon. Okay? And now I want you to see the lemon in your hand. Okay? All right? And then I want you to put the lemon up to your nose, and I want you to smell the lemon. Okay? It's a very distinct smell, right? You smell the lemon. And then put the lemon on the table, and then cut the lemon with a knife. Okay? And then lick the lemon. Okay? Lick the lemon. Everyone's giving me this puckered face. Okay? So that space where we've done this with the lemon is the space of the unconscious where Jung would experience these kinds of images. But if you can imagine, that moment of the lemon would sometimes last for an hour. He would be on a train, and then suddenly his eyes would be open, and he would be looking out the window and seeing the terrain, but he was still in that space of the lemon. All of this imagery and stories would be downloaded, and he would be encountering this that he would later write down. Now, with all of this pressure and writing this stuff down, he was starting to get an idea that perhaps this was a healthy function, okay? That this was healthy. He was thinking, am I going crazy, okay? But at the same time, he was starting to feel better. That something was shifting in him, and he was starting to feel much, much better. One of the scenes of the Red Book, he encounters a biblical character who comes in. He's sitting in a kitchen, if you can imagine, again. Just like the lemon, he's in this space in the kitchen, and he's talking to a cook, and as he's talking to this cook, he falls asleep, all right? So now this is interesting. What happens when you fall asleep during an active imagination? Well, you're going deeper into the unconscious. So he falls asleep, and he hears this swishing noise, and a biblical figure named Ezekiel comes whooshing by, and Jung says, where are you going? And he says, we're going to Jerusalem to pray at the Holy Sepulchre, which is the Holy Sepulchre, the venue of where Jesus is said to have arisen after the crucifixion. And Jung says, that's a great idea. Can I come with you? And Ezekiel says, no, 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 you can't come. You have a body. We're dead. And this was the seminal moment in the material because it showed that Jung actually experienced, even in the realm of the unconscious, the dead as being those who do not have bodies, physical bodies. So whatever appeared to him in the unconscious were those discarnates, or those without bodies. Okay? So the way Jung was encountering these, the dead, and encountering figures of the unconscious was very different. Now, figures of the unconscious actually are material in our dreams, and material in that lemon space that actually belongs to us. Okay? It really belongs to our personality. And Jung thought that it splits off so that we can examine it and be in relation to it in order so that eventually, like a magnet, it comes back into our personality. But you see, the dead can't do that. The dead aren't supposed to do that, right? The dead are doing their own thing. You don't want the dead incorporated into your personality. You know, that's not really what you want. So Jung managed to move through the material for about 6 months, and he said that those 6 months really was the guff of his material, the absolute prima materia, and he was to write 20 volumes of psychological writing, professional writing, based on those 6 months. He emerged right out and talked about psychological types, just based on what he saw, the interacting between figures of the unconscious, the dead, and himself. Okay? He was at a lecture in, let's say, June, July. In July, he was at a lecture in the UK. At the end of July, he was having trouble getting home. August 1st, the World War broke out. World War I broke out, and suddenly he was greatly relieved, because he realized that the dream he had in October of Europe freezing and the bloody seas was in fact a premonition of what was to come. And he felt, although it was very sad, the World War breaking out, he felt incredibly relieved that, in fact, his dreaming and the content of the Red Book, that there was something to this that actually was confirmed and affirmed in daily life. Okay, so he did this. He put these images in the Red Book. The Red Book was actually put in a vault by the Jung family, and it stayed in a vault for over 50 years. The Jung family was very worried and very concerned. They didn't want it published because they were worried what people would think. And an academic at the University of London, Sona Shamdasani, who's a Jungian historian, approached the family and said, you know, we live in a different time. And people, Jungians especially, have been very keen to hear and to see and to read, because this is where Jungian psychology started. It started with the days he sat in his study doing active imagination and then writing it down. It's time to have a look at this. Now, at the time, I was in the second chapter of my dissertation, and I said to my supervisor, I think this dissertation is going to be more Jung than Virgil. I might have to leave Aeneas at the other side of the Styx, and I might have to just move on with Jung. And he said, okay, that's fine. And I said, I need to read the Red Book, though. And he's like, well, they've been talking about that for about 20 years. And I said, no, it's going to be published, I know it is. So I'll take 18 months off, and I went and had children and built a family, and I said, it's coming, I know it's coming. And in 2009, it was published. And I said, give me 6 months. I know exactly what I'm looking for. I'm just looking at the narrative thread of the dead. I'll pull that out, and I'm going to write this theory, and it'll be done. Just 6 more months. And it took me 3 more years to get through it. Just all the material. There was so much more on the dead in the Red Book than I had really thought. And the versions in Memory Streams is really amended, much more shortened. So why? What does Jung say about why it's important to be one with the dead? And he talks about that living our lives, if we truly live our lives and live in terms of a self that's honest and true, he says we have to get together with our dead. And what he means by that, and he actually, parts of the Red Book actually act this out and unfold this, is that when you answer the dead's questions, when they come to you, not only are you answering your own questions, but you are satisfying their needs and their desires. That service to the dead is in fact service to yourself. That, when one travels to the underworld, what Aeneas ends up seeing in the underworld is not only Dido there, his past, but his present mistakes and his present struggles, but he also sees his future. That the whole reason Anchises wanted him to come to the underworld was to show him how important his journey was. That you have to keep going, because you will be the father of these famous people who will found this wonderful land called Rome, and it will be a great city. So the unconscious, the underworld, was that space where the past and the present and the future are one thing, okay? And that needs to be reconciled. So Jung talks a lot in the Red Book, in the third part, about being of service to your dead, about answering the questions that the dead have left to you as your legacy. And so this means a little bit something different than taking up the family business or inheriting the family business. These are different questions. Jung had one dream where he, and this is early on in 1911, where wicked gentlemen from the 17th century are talking to him in Latin. And he doesn't understand what they're saying because he doesn't speak Latin, which is not really true. He actually was a very good Latinist. But he didn't understand what they were saying. He woke up from that dream really disturbed. So what he did is he left. He was on holiday at the time. He left. He went home and he finished a chapter of his book. And he talks about how finishing that chapter was the answer to the ancestors' questions. That he was able to act upon what they asked him, even though he didn't understand it. Okay? So he talks about servicing the dead and being of service to the dead and being in contact with the dead. And there are many, there are other people. Marie-Louise von Franz was a student of his and a colleague of his for many, many years. And she talks about how the dead live in such different conditions to us. It's not a good idea to hang out with them all the time. But when they do get in contact, it's important to listen. Because not only do we answer their question, we answer ours. And by answering our questions, we orient ourselves into the unconscious. We orient ourselves to the unconscious. And that's an important process to be able to become more conscious. That is individuation, okay? Whenever we're becoming more conscious, that's individuation. So that's kind of like the journey and the travel of Jung and what the ancestors might want from us and how they appear. But it's really in Constance's work that some of these questions become very real and very immediate. So
Thank you. So I wonder. So how are you feeling? Do we want to segue to questions specifically for Jungian material? Shall I present what I want to dovetail into this, and then we have Q&A at the end? How do you feel? Does anybody have a pressing? You want a piece of paper to what?
Number 2.
The second one. Okay, great. So, as Stephanie and I have been friends since college, forever.
almost 40 years.
Yeah, good Lord.
Almost 40 years.
The rest of the audience. So, it was really fun to kind of dovetail our journeys together and go, wait, you're getting this? Oh my God, I'm getting this. And so, one of the things when I couldn't wait. I was like, oh my God, I can't wait for this book. And I was so floored when she said, I think there's going to be material in the Red Book. I have to wait for the Red Book. I'm like, Stephanie, and then bam, there it was. So it was fantastic. Read it soup to nuts. It's fantastic. It is very scholarly because it is academia, but it was also, I found it beneficial to my work. And what I've discovered that I wanted to, and Steph and I have talked about it before, and I wanted to share with you tonight, is that I definitely find that in my experience with my work, and I've done my own fair share of studies in mediumship trials with various people, my work is not typical. It's not evidential mediumship where I get someone and they say, this is how I died, this is what I did for a living, their birthday's coming up, rah, rah, rah. Mine is really kind of, what do we call it, like psychic psychotherapy, spiritual therapy, because there's so much that is unfinished. And I don't mean just that when a family member dies suddenly, here's what happens in my experience. Your experience could be different, but in my experience, when they pass, they are attached to their personality in this incarnation, and they might have some unfinished stuff that they want to work through, and therefore, oftentimes, they kind of infiltrate our thoughts and our minds, and we might feel them around. And I always tell students that if you still feel your mother around, if you still feel your brother around who died suddenly or whatever, close your eyes when you're standing in your kitchen. Close your eyes, put your hands on your heart, and say, who are you? And then you get that it's your brother. And then what are you asking of me? What can I do for you? Because sometimes they really are reaching out for our help. Sometimes they do just want to say, can you ever forgive me? And then, or whatnot. So when I do mediumship with people, I am a conduit and help them. Mostly I work for Spirit, which means people come and sit with me, and they might have their own agenda. If they say that I live on this road, I'll believe it's them. If they say our nickname exactly, I'll believe it's them. And I don't really care about any of that, because my focus is totally on Spirit. What do you want in this 1 hour session? They may be paying me, but it's what do you want? And a lot of times I have to tell you, it's fascinating to me, because what I find in my experience is that when we're just going to call them the dead instead of loved ones on the cross, but when the dead have recently passed and they're still connected to the personality, it's a very different experience to when all of a sudden that they flip and they are fully aware of, I'm going to say it, sorry for those of you that thinks this is the only life, numerous lifetimes that they lived. And they come through with information that is more wise soul or connected to the source. And I have had situations where teenagers have passed, and I'm giving information to the family, and then all of a sudden I say, now they want to talk about this, and how you haven't really, how they've left the family, and nobody really talked about feelings in the family, and they really want you to start talking about feelings, and then the parents are like, whoa, that doesn't sound like my teenage child. And it's because they can see a different perspective. And I want to also say, though, it's not as if they are watching everything we do. Because I'm like, do you watch everything? Not necessarily. They definitely, through my discovery, I've found that when we're going through a heavy emotional time, they come around. I know that there are some people in here that are really close to their dead. They talk to their dead all the time, and I think it's fantastic. And that is, and I don't ever, I tell students or people that come, you're not holding them back. You're not holding them back. I do wonder, are they holding you back, having a bonding relationship like that? But I know many people that have come to me that they've had this ongoing love relationship with their family members, and they still do, and death has not separated that. I do know other families where there's not a connection. They can't feel their loved ones. They long for it, so it's a needy connection, and in my words, I hate to even say this, but it doesn't seem so healthy because it's holding the living back. And I always say, write letters to your dead. What is the unfinished business? I'll tell you a personal story that I went through an experience, and I was like, man, I just really feel like one of my ancestors are coming to me to, bring an issue that affected me back to my family and open it up and talk about it. And this was a heavy issue that nobody was talking about. And I think the reason was because this ancestor's children are at an age where they're going to be passing soon. And they were holding on to the grief and the strife of that lifetime. And me, as the ancient, the younger ancestor, was able to say, let's break open the conversation so there can be deeper healing, so that when we all go into the next life or whatever's next, that there can be a true love and awareness and compassion and understanding. So for me, it's fascinating because I don't really, can I confess this? I don't really like doing mediumship because people always think they're going to come in and have relief and like, oh, great, now. And a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, they come and it is relief. They get amazing messages. We're both crying, I'm crying. They feel the loved one in the room. Heck, there's been times when I'm like, do you smell the cigarette smoke? There's cigarette smoke. And they're like, they were a chain smoker. And I'm like, yeah. But there are other times where where I connect to their loved one and I say, they're still grieving. And the life sitter says, what do you mean they're grieving? I thought they were happy and in a blissful state. And I said, no, you're grieving and they're still grieving. But what they're telling me, what they need from you, because I'm not a lazy psychic, I'll go, okay, so now what? What's the more to the story? And usually the loved one on the other side will then say, if they process through the grief, then I can process through my grief and we can get to a better place. And this is, usually I find they give the sitter, the live person, homework. They're like, this is what, can they ever forgive me? I'm sorry, one time, I have to tell you this little story. One time I was tuning in. I've had fantastic experiences. One time I was tuning in, I got the woman's male family lineage and her father and her mother. And I told about the dad and what he did for a living, which I'm like, okay, blah, blah, blah. And then went to the mom, got what she did, or what she was about. And then she started saying how close they were in relationship, how they had a fantastic relationship, they were so connected. And the woman is going, And I'm going, whoa, wait a second. Let me look. So what I do is my things is I throw light at her to make sure, bring in the angels to say, is this real? Is she real? It was real. She stayed. And I just was like, wait, she's saying that you're not telling the truth. Your person here is saying you're lying. And I said, you're lying. And she's like, I'm not lying. And I said, she says she's not lying. And she's like, she's lying. And so I finally turned and I said, why are you lying? And she said, because she lies all the time. She's been living a lie. She's not had a happy life for a long time. She's covered it up. I always lied and she's lying, even to herself. I'm very good at lying to myself and she's very good at lying to herself. And the whole thing switched. The person had a eureka experience, started crying, I was crying, and the mom turned to light and shifted. And I was like, it was a huge release for the mom. And I think it was that the mom wasn't really there for the daughter as they were growing up. And now after death, she could finally be there in a different way. And so it is hard for me to do the work because I sit there and I think, why isn't it just a happy, easy world and everybody's compassionate and full of love? Wouldn't that be nice? But sometimes when we pass, we have unfinished business, and I try to be the best I can be, but I'm not perfect by any means. And so I know that with loved ones that have crossed, sometimes people come to me because they miss them. And I get that, because I feel the love in the room is palpable, and they just want a grain of, does life continue? And you bet it does. From my experience, it's a continuation. And usually we've, done countless lifetimes with the same people. And, but it doesn't mean the connection's gonna be easy. It doesn't mean it's not. Sometimes it's incredibly easy. And I just know that, that in my work, I found that sometimes the loved ones get in touch with us because they're asking us a favor. They're asking us either for compassion, understanding, forgiveness, or actually to do something for them, literally. And so I invite you that whenever you feel, because there's countless ways that we can communicate with loved ones that have crossed. You can have visions of them. They can come in dream time. You can literally feel their energy come to you. You might smell their cigarettes, chain smoking. You might hear their voice. Oftentimes it's in your voice in your own head, but it's their thoughts. You say, who said that? If it's a thought out of nowhere, say, who said that? And if you hear mom, trust it. And, and then if you hear, I miss you every day, and then and you say, I miss you every day. I miss you every day. It's that connection. It doesn't end. It does not end. And I'm not the only one in the room that can do it, because as I look out, I know many of you still talk to your dead, and I want to confirm and affirm that that is a real experience. And, we're in this form, but we are soul, and soul continues and continues. So I'm going to stop there so we have time for some questions, and then in the end I might see if there's anybody that wants to, or some kind of experience that wants to happen beforehand. So, breathing. Oh, you know what's so cool? Look at me, I interrupted it. I also wanted to say thank you all for coming. I wanted to say also thanks to the West Tisbury Library and Olivia and Beth. And I want to thank your loved ones that we've invited in early to come in, so that if we do get to that point, they're here and strong. And I'm all about fast and furious. So be loud if you want to show up, loved ones. So any questions on any of the material? Yes?
So you've said you don't know whether there's life after or whatever. What is that, or what would you consider where those spirits are?
Where they hang out?
Yeah.
Oh, the unconscious. Do you know what so in my experiences, because I've asked, sometimes I'll say, can I see through your eyes how you see? Now, they don't, not physical eyes, but spirit, soul eyes. And and sometimes I hear laughter, and sometimes I have seen some things where they'll literally show me, like some of them work jobs where they've helped people that have had tragic death come through. I have a story, but I won't. I was talking with some friends, and there was this, I know I'm not answering your question. Do you want me to tell you the story? It's a cute story. So we're standing, or I'm in the room, and we're just talking, we're hanging out, and all of a sudden, I look around, we're friends hanging out, right? I think we even had beers. And I see this kid, this young kid, he's in my mind's eye, standing there, teenage, dripping wet, like he's just gone swimming, swim trunks. And I was like, whoa, there's this kid here. And I said, you got a cousin, a brother, or whatever? And this was early on in my work. And they said, no, makes no sense, no. Now, a lazy psychic would be like, ooh, I'm really bad. I'm not. And I said, not me. Where'd you come? What are you here for? Who'd you come with? Who'd you come with? I said, and he said, I came with him. And he shows me an arc light. I look over in the corner, and there's this empty chair. And there's a man, and he's like, I'm their dad. And he totally describes him, dark hair. It was so cool. I was like, oh, he came with your dad. And the young man said, holy moly. I said, why did you come with the dad? Why did you come with the dad? And the kid said, because his job on the other side, wait for it, is when people die tragic deaths, teenagers in particular, he helps them with the trauma when they get to the other side. And I'm thinking, this is freaky. And the boy said, oh my gosh, my dad always used to be like, because they used to cliff jump or whatever. He said, Dad would always say, make sure it's not shallow water, you gotta check the depth of the water so you don't get hurt. The kid had snapped his neck when he fell. And so he didn't know him in the physical, but he knew him in the afterlife. And so I'm like, what? How does that even work? And then I said, what is it like over there? Can you show me? And they said, you wouldn't comprehend it with your eyes. And I'm like, can you teach me and I can comprehend it? Is there anything you can show me that I can you give me a metaphor? So, yeah, I don't always have all the answers, which is a bummer. Whoa, wouldn't that be nice? So nice. Yeah.
I have a question. When you talk about your ancestors, can it also be close friends?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Because my experience is that a close friend can choke.
Yes, absolutely. And so you've had those experiences?
I thought I did.
Yes.
I don't know, where it is.
Okay, so this is what I encourage you to do, because the fear, disbelief are big blocks to it. So the second you feel somebody around,
Yeah.
take a breath
Yeah.
and you say, who's here? I always say, close your eyes, put your hands on your
But I
heart. You don't
kind of
have
knew
to.
right away.
What?
I kind of knew.
You knew right away, great. So then
Yeah.
acknowledge and say,
Yeah.
oh, I see,
Yeah.
I feel
But
you.
it was not family, it was.
Yes, I feel you, and what is it I can do for you? Because what happens is our affirmation of the connection gives them strength. Like sometimes you might feel them, and then you might, when you go, what's there? I see light, and then I all of a sudden say, okay, who are you, Mom? And then I see shape. But yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes they just want to hang around and have a good laugh. So they'll put in our mind memories that we shared, and we think we're thinking the memories, but they're the ones putting the memories in.
Oh, I see. This was mostly in a helpful way.
Yes.
And I needed and appreciate.
Fantastic, and then always say thanks, because then they'll be like, yay. Yeah. Yay, I'll go back to you. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that you have that. Anyone else? There's someone in the back.
Yeah, I'd like to know your guys' opinion on how you think, and I think Young dove into this subject a lot, how psychedelics affect this process, because I know it's an electrochemical process and that can be used to induce religious or mystical experiences.
Right, can I take that first? So for me, I personally, I was in Vision Quest in the Amazon, and they're like, here, drink this ayahuasca. Did not affect me at all. The shaman was like, everybody was freaking out. It did not affect me. But if I'm around people that have smoked pot, and I'm near their auric field, I'm like, whoa, and I can't get back in my body. So for me, I choose not to use that because my life is trippy enough. It's just, I can have more control when I do and go and trust with my heart than when I can get locked into those places and I can't get back in my body. And I would rather be more in control. So that's my experience. Yours?
There's some really wonderful research out in hospice where people are really agitated towards the last week. If they're given some of, what is it specifically? I'm not quite sure.
I suppose...
LSD?
No,
An
not
LSD.
as much LSD, more mushrooms, because it is the thing that is supposedly our ancestry, the oldest ones,
Right.
24 billion years old, and they came before us, and now they're known as the Earth's internet, so there is some deep connection we have with this chemical and the
Right.
planet itself, it seems.
Well, what they discovered, and it was a trial, there were quite a few people in the trial, is that not only did it reduce anxiety about death and the process, but it seemed from the narratives that they were collecting that there was some excavating going on, some pre-journey stuff going on, so that they felt more comfortable with the very next step. That they were able to come back and talk about, well, it seems like there might be something after I leave my body. Stanislav Grof was probably one of the great transpersonal psychologists who has done the most work around that. He was very interested in how people and he's the father of rebirthing, and that rebirthing process is kind of simulated with chemicals. I'm kind of like Khan, I don't really need anything to launch me.
Yeah, I've never had the experiences that you guys think about building. I can feel like that resonates with it is, I study a lot about history and try to understand the world, and I get this everything's vibration. I get
Yes.
truth vibration.
Yes.
I feel like I've only met 2 other people who've ever said they got something like that. And it's always, when I'm asking myself or trying to, one of the few times I've taken psychedelics, I got this immense, by myself, this immense sense of infinite love. I never felt anything like that. in my life.
Yeah, we can do that in meditation.
And I was in a terrible, yes, I'm practicing that. I was in a terrible state, and it just made me really appreciate it. I don't know why I'm here, I don't know what's going on, I don't know what to do, but I know I appreciate it at the very least.
Yeah, and that's why I teach, because I think we can all tap into these spaces and then navigate them easier once we kind of understand what's going on in each like realm or experience.
So once the Tibetan monks came to Sydney and they did the Great Sand Mandala on the Clark, and I went to, meditate with them, and then I asked one of them, I said, for us Westerners who meditate a lot, is this space that we meditate in, is that where you go in depth? And he laughed and he said, of course. Of course. So I think this type of work, the people who are doing this type of work, and it's being reintroduced now, is they are looking at it in terms of end-of-life care, and particularly interested in the visualization part of it. Right? Yeah.
So also then why was there a need for the programs of MK Ultra and things of that nature? Like, why did the government decide we're going to take this away, your interaction with the phenomenological divine? They chose to do that. It was a choice. Like the.
You know what? Can I narrow it back to the scope just because we have a little bit of time, and then maybe afterwards we're going to be available like out in the parking lot or whatever you can. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's so specific. Yeah.
I was with a girl one night at a party. Way back when Tony she later became my wife. And all of a sudden, it was like, God, ghost! And I saw my mother's ghost sitting right between us. And I said, get back into the car. We'll meet back in your car, meet you back at 7-Eleven.
Right.
She did. And I said, I've got something to tell you. She said, you don't have to tell me. You saw your mother. I said, exactly. Skipping down a bit, I was over at the house for dinner. And all of a sudden she started laughing, couldn't stop. And all of a sudden down on the floor. I said, what's the matter? Get away. She said, it's your mother. And she said, get away, I don't ever eat. It was like, she said, it was like being raped.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that happened a couple more times. She later came up.
So let me respond to that. A couple things is, so there, do you want to take that or you want me to keep going?
Yeah, you go.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So there's a couple things is sometimes when we, wow, isn't that funny? I wanted to say something, but it's like my brain has been edited. There is in that same realm of the dead. So in that same realm of the dead there's other entities, which is what Jung went into. What are the figures of the unconscious? Are they projections? Are they trickster energy? Sometimes when there we go, thank you. When we have an experience, I'm talking that spirit all the time. When we're having an experience and it's scary and frightening, we have to discern, are we afraid of the new experience, or is it because we're dealing with something that is scary and dark? And some trickster spirits can personify other people that we are familiar with. And the best thing to say in those kind of situations, and they're up to no good, some trickster spirits are up to no good, and so I've heard these stories before, that uncomfortable things happen or bad things can happen with kind of going into that realm. But you have to realize that in any situation, we are always in control, don't you think? And you can say, I have no time for you, go to the light. Back in the day, they would do whatever and stuff like this. But it really is saying, coming up with someone that's being haunted or being troubled is to coming up with their own way, whether it's their form of prayer or go to the light. I'm loved by, one time I worked for somebody that did healing work, and I used to change the sheets in the treatment room, and I stepped in the door to go change the sheets, and this dark entity jumped on me, and I was like, ran into the bathroom, and I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and the words came to me. I'm a gift from God above, I'm filled with light and love. I'm a gift from God above, I'm filled with light and love. And as soon as the third time I said it, it went whoosh and left, and I was like, shit! And I went out to the woman and I said, the healer, and I said, what did you just treat that person for? And she said, possession. I was like, Jesus, you didn't ask it to go to the angels. So yes, there are dark forces, but I also believe that we can stand in the light and say, be clean. I'm so sorry you all went through that.
Well, she did, I knew she wanted to tell me something, and she was just using.
Your friend, your wife, your future wife, yeah, it's so hard. Yeah.
What I liked about the story, though, is it seems like you both saw the same thing. Is that right? You both experienced the same
She
thing.
experienced that, so
Okay.
Oh, wow,
So
yeah.
she experienced it.
Yeah.
So that's, in one sense, an amazing confirmation that you're sharing the same unconscious space in regards to the issue that came up at that time. So she was obviously trying to communicate something to you, maybe about her.
I might have
Maybe.
figured it out. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So go ahead,
Okay.
ask. You ask the next.
Yep.
Can you make a comment on the influences of religious beliefs in terms of this spiritual sort of past?
Great.
Sorry, what?
Yeah.
What was it?
Can you make a comment to the, but this is what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Can you make a comment to the religious beliefs on how the path goes?
Okay, in relation to Jung, or just?
In general.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
listen, I think-
from one perspective,
Sure,
if
sure.
you're
I mean,
relatively good, you go up. From another perspective, if you're
Right.
relatively bad, you go down.
Right. I mean, I think all the world faiths have contemplative traditions, right?
Yeah.
And in a contemplative tradition, you are stepping away from the modern world into a space, an oracular space, a special space. And that special space, I feel, we all share.
Yeah.
I mean, you call it the gateway of Judaism and the gateway of Islam, but I think it goes to the same place when you're in contemplation.
And what I found in my work is that it does depend on what their belief, the constructs of their belief reality are, but it doesn't mean that any one is not true. It means almost in a way that all are true. I have had experiences where you would think people were in hell situation, and I've channeled them, and people have asked me, can you talk, get in touch with my son? And I'm like, okay, here's your son, and there's a giant angel. They've come with a giant angel, and the family has wept because they thought this child would have ended up somewhere. In their belief of Catholicism, they thought they would be in hell. And in that moment, wait for it, I was like, angel? Then the angel was like, there's only love on the other side. Not, there is no hell. And I was like, dang, yeah, right. Yeah, right.
You were saying earlier about past lives and we've come back and we've been in relationships with the same people. I think I read a book by Shirley MacLaine years ago, maybe Out on a Limb.
Yeah.
And, that my husband could have been my son or
Yeah.
my brother. Can you address that?
Yeah, I've had that experience with reads where I'll be like, oh, how you feeling about this? Where that has come true. And so sometimes what we do, come here, sometimes when I see a friend and I teach in my classes, I say, okay, let's see if we've known each other. And we look at each other in the eye and we bring our hands up, so we make a little window and we say, how have I known you before? And all of a sudden we let their visual image shift away and their clothes change and maybe even their male to female, female to male. And you can have quite the experience as how many lifetimes have we shared together. And sometimes you get the same number and you say, do I owe you an apology from other incarnations? Or what did I do? Or were we? And you get this real connection, because then again, you're tapping into that unconscious where the ancient memories are stored, and you're empowering yourself in the moment to know that we live beyond this. And so I encourage you to do that. Like when you have a familiar somebody, Steph and I, you can't tell, but we're twins from several lifetimes.
I don't think you're friends with someone for 40 years and not share an awful lot.
Yeah.
And when we first met, it was very familiar. And we all have people in our lives like that we feel that there's a depth of connection there that we can't explain.
Yeah.
So you go with that because it feels very significant.
Yeah.
Do you think sometimes you're trying to work through?
Yes. Sometimes it is the unfinished business, well said. Sometimes it is that unfinished business that you didn't, And sometimes it's to pick up where we left off. Spiritual seekers always.
This is more Joan. You said about the red book. And
Yes.
he had trouble with the precog about the red, seeing the red sea.
Right.
Versus then, not versus, but then other than contemplating coming to grips with the past. I would like to know if you talked about about the difference in the vibration between dealing with the past or dealing with precog.
Yeah, that's very interesting because one of the byproducts that he discovered of spending time in and with the unconscious was that everything starts to feel like the present, that the idea of time kind of dissolves. And he talks about the unconscious being a timeless and spaceless place and having a quality of timelessness and spacelessness. And he grappled with that characteristic in relation to what the dead know, because the model that we've kind of inherited from spiritualism is that we go and ask the dead questions because we think they know more than we do. But Jung was saying, well, that can be true, but it's a kind of knowing of a very special sort. And if you don't have a container to put that knowledge in, then it just dissipates. So it's a kind of knowledge about bigger things and cosmic things, and no, you would not understand it if we showed it to you, because you are in a container that can process. So he talks about a student of his had a dream, and he was in the dream actually, and she was sitting with her father who had recently been deceased, and he was really interested in what she had been doing recently since he died, and he kept asking her questions. Well, what does that mean that you did this? And Jung was saying, well, I was in the dream too, and I mean, I was a psychiatrist. He wasn't interested in asking me, and I was there, but he was interested in the conditions of life and the embodiment of our experience incarnate. And so he deduced from those kinds of dreams and experiences that, and the whole third part of the Red Book is really about the dead who are very unsatisfied with their new existence of being dead. They don't know how to function there because they don't understand formlessness. Okay? It takes them a while to understand formlessness and to be able to use the unconscious in the unconscious for themselves. So does that answer?
Do you see how many different places we could have gone with this talk tonight?
Like, I don't know if that answers your question, because really the psyche for someone like Jung was about the more individuated we are, the more conscious we become, then the past and the present and the future become this very powerful one place. Yeah. You know, it doesn't really matter what you're going to do next week. You just know what's going to happen next week, in a way.
So let's do 2 more questions, and then we need to stop for time.
Yeah.
So
I had a question. This is kind of a follow-up to what you were just talking about not really being used to the formlessness and, you know, navigating all of that, right? So is that similar to what Christians would call purgatory or Buddhists would call the bardo? I mean, is that kind of that place where you hang out for a while?
It is a good place. I'm a little hesitant about saying, yeah, it's definitely that, because who am I? I don't, whatever. I do think the Tibetans are very good about explaining the bardos and what that process is like when the soul leaves the body. It goes through this recognition process, this cleansing, and this preparation phase. So, and I'm a little less familiar with the whole Christian format of that, but I do think that there is this, and Jung said, what we're doing when we acknowledge our dead is really preparing ourselves for that safe space. The more we acknowledge our dead, the more we will be fine when we get there, because we've been familiarizing ourselves with servicing the dead. So when we get there, we'll be familiar, and it won't feel so formless to us. So I do think, yes, I could say more probably from the bardo aspect. It is probably close to that. Yeah. Oh, there's
one more. Good luck.
You choose the purple.
Have you used this kind of work to deal with perhaps like the trauma or grief of both individual and more collective things like the impacts of war or of slavery, or, like I'm just thinking of, my father was World War II hero, and I feel like to some degree that I carry a lot of the tension and the grief and the fear that he had there. And I was just talking with some people that live in Europe where there seems to be more of a consciousness of that, because, of course, as you talked about Jung's dream, these things have taken place. But I'm not talking about reparations per se, but just about healing some of these collective deeds, or that are both individually and collective.
Well, I
would say something, I would want to talk to you after talk about that, some thoughts that I have on that.
And because what you're going into is really cultural psyche and how countries and cultures actually hold a pattern, and it is an inheritance. And epigenetic research right now is doing some fascinating things with realizing that third generation trauma sufferers, although not exposed to the trauma, are reacting to the trauma even though they haven't been exposed. Along with that comes a really interesting psychological framework that people are starting to pay attention to. And so when people end up in the therapy room, we're starting to understand how to ask the right questions to see, are you bearing this problem on behalf of someone else, or is this your personal issue? So there's ways of kind of asking questions to kind of ascertain, are you holding the burden of cultural psyche? It's very interesting work.
And this is a great question because I think that, because there's a lot of people that are like us that actually work only in the spirit realm. And that would be a great, I might write a blog on that, because that would be a great objective to hold counsel to all of those trauma victims on the other side, because you could do that, and have it then trickle through to today, to the ancestors through today, as opposed to a one-on-one.
And that's really personal. Like, I'm terrified of flying when my father was shot down.
Yeah.
You know, so that's on a very base level.
Yeah.
But there's also a great sense of harm, both harm to the individual person that was in the war, the harm to the people that suffered through the war, and the harm that we all kind of carry.
Yeah, I have a book I want to tell you about after the fact.
So, and just one last thing I'd say to you is to have a look at how those questions or issues show up in your personal choices of work, who you socialize with, your patterns of daily life, and see if by acknowledging it, by being able to hold that, if you're able to heal it. Because part of what in transgenerational trauma does is it's passing on. We seem to inherit images as well that come with it. And if we acknowledge it and then are able to say, wait, I don't think this is mine, then it seems to work itself out. It finds a place in the psyche that is less angst, or less angst.
I'd be more interested in not in getting rid of it, but in seeing it lightly for everyone.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have to stop.
Do we have to?
Yeah, we
Well,
do.
Olivia, how long can we chit chat?
Can we milk a couple more minutes?
8 minutes. 8 minutes. Okay, 8 minutes. All right.
Hi. First of all, thank you both. It's really amazing to have you here. And I look forward to getting to know you. I've worked with Constance before. It's changed my life doing mediumship with her. And I just wanted to say, what is the connection? Is there a connection between mental illnesses or personality disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar and the unconsciousness or different realms of consciousness?
Why don't you talk about how you see that psychically, and then I can talk about it. How do you see schizophrenia psychically?
How I see schizophrenic psychically is I see them tuned into different vibrations at the same time. And so, and I don't know that it's necessarily, it's going to be hard, this is my experience, my opinion. I don't see that it's necessarily something that can come together in necessarily this incarnation, but I don't necessarily see that it's not. But it's being tapped in, and sometimes the soul gets shattered in pieces before the incarnation to have the experience, is my experience, or sometimes they have the soul scattered and shattered as they're coming in because of childhood trauma or genetic trauma from culture or whatnot. And so, but for me, they're tapped into too many realms at once. And I think the best thing is to too big of a topic for 8 seconds. Yeah. So.
And Jung was very interested in disassociation because he himself felt like this was what was happening to him at this time, where he couldn't figure out, wait, what are all these images? And so disassociation was something that he spent a lot of time looking at. And the idea of these different parts of ourselves being projected out so that we could reacquaint ourselves for the sole purpose of it being reintegrated. So he spent a lot of time looking at that. And there's all sorts of reasons why people would get to that place. There are medications that make people dissociated, that fracture the personality. They're trying to help, but they end up, loosening up the boundaries to personality. So any art therapists here? Sandtray therapists? Something that's really interesting, because Jung was kind of the father of expressive arts therapy, he drawing himself, but he could say that you could look at a drawing from someone and tell diagnostically from the drawing what the potential for healing would be, just on the structure of the drawing itself, and Sandtray therapists can tell the same. You can look at a Sandtray configuration and tell what are the chances that the ego is solid and that the ego will ride this out. So that's a very interesting place.
I'm an artist. Can you look at your own work?
Yeah, you can. It's hard. It's confusing and hard.
Okay, last question, and then I want to tell you one more thing at the end.
I always thought that when dead people come and talk to us, that we're meant to ask them how they're doing. And you're saying we're supposed to, they're telling us something, not how they're, I usually say, oh, well, how are you doing? Oh, I'm playing golf every day. Okay, great, bye. And I didn't know that we're supposed to something.
I would invite you to say, what can I do for you?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, huge. What can I do for you? So many times it's favors. Call your brother, call my sister, bring flowers to so-and-so. I have like people, they'll be like, how did you know I needed that? And I'm like, can I talk to them? So, yeah.
And also Jung said, I realized I had to teach the dead and guide them. That's my legacy. That's my responsibility, is to teach my dead. And so part of teaching the dead is asking, what do you need?
What do you need?
What can I do for you?
And so in closing, I just want to say one thing. When you decide that, you know what, I'm going to give this a go and talk to my own loved ones, you're going to recognize the connection in love. And you might be brought to tears, you might feel warmth over your heart and all this stuff. And sometimes when you ask a question, the answer will rush back, or you'll know the answer before you even get the question out or whatever. But you'll feel that they're I want to use the word real. You'll feel that they're real. They are who they say they are. But again, in any situation when you're like, wait, this doesn't feel right. I don't want to really talk to you. So on another note, if somebody comes through that's a family member that you didn't have a nice relationship with, you might go, listen, I'm not going to talk to you, but is there an angel over there I can talk to that can tell me what you want? Because maybe we're supposed to heal something and I have to get over something because maybe you finally opened your eyes and I need to let go of it because it's holding me back, not seeing you clearly, So it becomes this full-on dynamic. I have a blast over there clearly. So anyway, in closure.
I just want to say that we want to thank the ancestors for coming and blessing our work this afternoon. And I thank you for coming out and spending time with them and in consideration of them. I think extending yourself into the psyche allows you to heal yourself as well and to become more individuated. Thank you.